and welcome to Fantasy Fiction Focus once again. Our guest today in Calgary is Howie Erickson. How are you this morning?
I'm fine, just fine, thanks.
Now, you are, I believe, officially a writer of speculative fiction. Now, we used to sort of fantasy, science fiction, romance, adventure, kids' books. What is speculative fiction? What does that mean?
Well, I guess, in some things, everything is speculative fiction when you're kind of making things up. But I think basically it's taking some sort of a idea and saying, well, what if this was really true? And then starting out there and writing a story. So it could be all sorts of things, and it's a lot of science fiction is like that. What if we were invaded by sea monsters or something like that? Would be writing a story and a speculative. So it all usually starts with what if this was the way it is, and that's kind of what speculative fiction is. But I was listening to something by Rob Sawyer, and he was saying the other day that everything is really, anything that's fiction is speculative. That's the definition of fiction. So it's kind of I guess a catch-all in some ways, but it's kind of when I talk about speculative fiction, I think of something that's kind of out there and not something you would normally see,
Yeah, because I think it is normally referred to. It's fantasy and science fiction. I think mostly is what it's referred to, rather than people talking about romance or detective stories or thrillers and things like that, I guess. So yeah. So now you haven't always been a writer, have you? This is you were doing other things, I think, for some time before you became this famous author.
Yeah, famous author, right? Yeah, before I became a famous author, quote, I worked as an engineer, and starting in Calgary, and then ended up in Houston and Malaysia and Borneo, and spent some time in Yemen as well. Wouldn't want to be there now, but did spend some time there.
Now, so this travel, I think you'd mentioned on your in one of our previous conversations, the travel you've done. This has had an influence on your work, or at least has entered your work as in the stories, hasn't it?
Yeah, some of the things that I learned while in Yemen actually worked into my story, the Bloodline Artifacts. So when you fly there, or you going from the capital Sana'a in the north out to the oil fields, I work in the oil industry, you fly over the area that was home to the Queen of Sheba, and you can still see some of the remnants of the empire, where she built a dam, and there's a huge lake there that's behind that dam that she built. So there's quite a few interesting things that went on there. And supposedly one of the three wise men is buried in Yemen. So that's some of the background of the story, and then plays into the novel I wrote.
So what about the other places you've been? Have they been a factor in the books as well over the years?
Well, we lived in Malaysia, and one of the nice things about being an expatriate is the companies usually pay your way home every year as a holiday. So instead of going home, we went with the kids and traveled through Europe, and so we got to see every summer. We got to traipse around there and spend 3 weeks or 4 weeks almost in various parts of the world. We went to Egypt one time and spent a bunch of time there crawling around in the tombs and going up the river, and we took a riverboat down the Nile, so it was quite an interesting trip. Went to Spain and toured around. Went to France, drove around France a lot in the back roads, and saw a lot of things that you don't normally see in a quick stop. So we kind of took our time and spent most of our time in one country each year, sort of thing, and that was kind of interesting. I learned a lot.
Well, I suppose you would if you travel. That is bound to have some influence on writing. But so, I think you'd mentioned that you'd retired, and that's when you sort of began to seriously take a look at writing. So, what was it that made you suddenly decide, yes, I'm going to become a writer after all this work in oil and engineering and goodness knows what else?
It's really hard to kind of pin it down, but bought a motorhome when I retired and toured some of the southwest in the United States, which is, I really love the desert in the southwestern United States. And was reading a number of books. We didn't get much chance to read otherwise, except on holidays. So I spent quite a bit of time reading. I was reading a Clive Cussler book actually, and I said, I could do this. And my wife said to me, well, why don't you try it? So I started writing, and we happened to be down in an area in southeastern California at the Alagadon Dunes. And so I kind of looked out the window and said, gee, there's a lot of sand here. I wonder what could be buried out there in those sand dunes. What if something was buried out there? And that's where the story started.
Well, that was the Bloodline Artifacts, I guess, which I want to get to later on. But you've done some short stories with what you started out with, I guess. Were they the first things you did?
Actually, no. I started writing the Bloodline Artifacts. It didn't have a title at the time. And I got to maybe 50, 60,000 words, maybe a little less than that. And I said, it can't be this easy. So I better learn something about this. And so I started taking some courses, which then that kind of derailed me from actually writing the novel. So for maybe 3 or 4 years, I took courses and started writing short stories, because it's a lot easier to write short stories than it is to write a novel. And got involved with the Alexander Center, the Writer Center here in Calgary. Actually was treasurer there for a couple of years and on the board. And so participated in a lot of different courses. Lots of good instruction there. If you really want to learn how to write, that's a good place to go. And so did that, wrote some short stories, and then went back to writing the novel, and started shopping the short stories around while I was writing the novel. Got one published in On Spec magazine, which is quite a good magazine, so I was quite happy with that. And a couple of others published in a anthology put out by the Henderson Writers Group just outside of Las Vegas.
So what about the Bloodline Artifacts? What's it about? Interesting title. What is this about in a nutshell? A large nutshell, I guess.
A large nutshell. It's about a number of historical artifacts that were left here and get activated by a child, and the father, because of an attempt on the life of his son, has to go and find out how his son is connected to these artifacts. And so doing that is what the story is all about. It leads from southern California, which we talked about in the start, to Yemen, to the Tower of London, historically back to the Native Americans in southwestern states, San Francisco fire, a bunch of things like that speculatively are all connected.
So research presumably was done on this too. Obviously, you went to some of these places, but I mean, did you have to do a lot of research as well, online and in books and things?
Did a fair amount of research. I mean, it is. I mean, you wouldn't want to take the story and say, well, this is not exactly historical fiction in the particular parts where I use history, but it is based on some facts, like we talked about Anne Boleyn and how she's involved, and go through her execution and some of the people around there talking. Well, that's obviously, I mean, totally speculative. There's no basis in fact, but it could have happened, So that's how the story is developed, and there's a lot of that. It's a multi-threaded novel that kind of spirals to a joining point and then carries on from there.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, historical fiction it's fiction, but it uses historical settings and people. We're allowed to do that as writers. We can use real people. I use some real people in some of mine as well. But so this came out when? This is recent, or? Oh,
about a year and a half ago.
Well, that's recent.
Yeah.
So, but you're working on a sequel or a part 2, or is it a series? Are there going to be 10 or 40 books or something?
Well, it started out as one book, got to be too long, so it ended up being 2 books now. And as I look at it, there's actually an option to have multiple follow-ups after the completion of this next book. So it could be a 7 or 8 book series. It actually has a potential to branch into a number of stories that could be continued separately.
And when is the next one going to be coming out? Are you working on it now? Is it finished, or what's happening?
It's about half finished, maybe. My target is spring of next year.
Okay. Now, did this was this published by a regular mainstream publisher or a small publisher, or is it self-published?
It was self-published. Now that's quite a story. I had interest from a couple of majors, and they just took so long. I said, well, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to publish it. So if you ever tried to get them in, I don't know whether yours have been major publishers or not, but it takes a long time to go through a publishing house. So being an impatient sort of guy, I said, well, I'm going to try this myself. So I did that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that a lot of people are coming across these days. I think obviously there are some established publishers, published authors who decide to still work with publishers and combine that with self-published work as well. But I think the main thing I'm finding these days is the time. I mean, it's now September. If somebody said yes, yes, we'd like to publish your book, and it's going to come out in 2018 or something like that, it's like, well, it's finished. I'd rather get it out there now. And so you take the risk, I suppose, of publishing it yourself. But why not? I think I would do that. It's mostly the time, so I don't blame you for that. Would you still approach publishers? Do you think? Do you think that you might still get interest from them, or will you stick with self-publishing now?
I think I'm going to self-publish. I do this for myself. It's not a great moneymaker, and from what I understand about the publishing now, you pretty well have to do all your marketing and so on yourself. If you're really a no-name author that they've just picked up, they don't really help you in that. So you might as well do it yourself anyway. And that's the big problem I found as a engineer. Marketing skills is not one of my strong points. So it's something I'm working on now, is learning how to do that. I mean, this interview is a first step in sort of trying to do that, and even the social media, trying to figure out what you should do and what's a waste of time and what's worthwhile. It's a big job as an author. It takes a lot of time away from your writing, which is the big problem with it.
Yeah, I find that too. Sometimes you're spending more time on the marketing than you are actually on the writing. But unfortunately, it's as you said, we all have to work out what works for us and what doesn't. I mean, for some people, they think Twitter is wonderful. Other people, it's YouTube. Other people, it's personal appearances, and they do a lot of events and things like that. So you've got to try them all to see what works best for you. Now, you were at the local event, of course, When Words Collide, weren't you?
I was, yes.
Yeah, so that was a. I was there too. I was sort of in and out, but I mean, that's a pretty impressive event. Now there's an awful lot of stuff going on there. Do you think it's valuable to go to those sort of things and as a writer?
Oh, I definitely. You have to pick and choose. I mean, some of them are pitch fests and so on, where you get a couple of minutes here or there to pitch to an agent. But if you go to some of the workshops and talks, like When Words Collide has a lot of multitude of sessions, almost too many that you have to select some. So the price is right. It's very economical to go to that one. There's other ones that are, in the hundreds of dollars to go, and there you really have to get your money's worth. I go quite often to the Las Vegas Writers Conference, which is in Henderson. Yes, and when I'm a member of the Henderson Writers Group as well down there. So that's a good one, but it's expensive. But it's small, so you get a chance to see the agents, sit down with them, and talk to them. The first agent I ever pitched to was Robert Sawyer's original agent, so it was a bit of a scary. I didn't find that out until afterwards, and I found out it was just very nice to me, but I didn't have a clue when I went there the first time. So you learn that. You learn how to pitch, and you learn the kind of what they're looking for, and so it's all a learning experience. But don't be afraid to get knocked down in your expectations. I thought I knew something, but really I didn't. When you come back, you say, "Well, that was a learning experience."
No, I think you've got to have a bit of a thick skin in this line of work, if that's what you want to call it. But I think the one of the things is it's a solitary business. Of course, we have to live in our own little world, in our own little office, and things as we create these wonderful books. But it's easy to be isolated. I think it's very important to be part of a writing community, even if it's online. But you have to meet people occasionally, and you meet an awful lot of people in Calgary and Western Canada, even at that event. And I think you'd mentioned the Alexandra Writers Center locally too. You had some stuff with them.
Yeah, that's where I took a course, I think, at Mount Royal, and one through the extension department in one of the schools, I think. And then I found Alexandra Writers Center, and they run courses year long. Basically, they run some weekend intensive courses, and they run 10-week courses throughout the fall session and the spring session. And so they've got a lot of course material where you can really learn the craft, and I highly recommend that to people. Also recommend volunteering. Go to the Alexander Center and volunteer to be on their board. You meet a lot of people, you learn a lot of things. It takes a bit away from your writing, but it's really worthwhile. I helped out on the board with the When Worlds Collide, and I was away quite a bit. I did a little bit, and they're always looking for volunteers, but when Worlds Collide, to just help out during the conference with ushering people around, giving directions, and so on. So there's lots you can do that way too, and meeting local writers, find out what they do, and participate.
Now, you had mentioned as well, of course, that I suppose as almost a final point here, you got into this writing thing after retirement and everything. As an older person, thought, yes, I can do this, but you still decided to go on some sort of course to see, okay, I need to learn this. You tried first though without that, and then decided, I should probably go on a writer's course as well, right?
Yeah, and I think if you talk to a lot of people, they say, what should you do as a writer? And for some of the things that I remembered is write, and don't be afraid if it's crap, to put it bluntly. Go ahead and write, and then start. That's what I did, and I look back on that original handwritten stuff in a notebook, and I say, oh my goodness, what a pile of. But it had the story idea, and so then I took the courses, wrote some short stories, and got critiqued on them, polished those up, wrote a novella, polished it up a bit. So probably wrote between novella and the short stories, equivalent of another novel quite easily. So you learn a lot during that, and you get a lot of feedback. And as you said, you need a thick skin because people try to be nice when they critique, but still, it's if your writing is not up to snuff, it's better if they tell you what the problem is. Otherwise, you just don't learn.
No, that's right. I think if anybody is going to be starting out with these in writing, I always recommend they go on a course of some sort, even if they don't enjoy it, and even if they don't think they're going to use the stuff, just go on a course. Don't just get started and think I know what I'm doing, because you probably don't when you're starting out. You probably haven't a clue, and it's even if you've got a great idea. So you're probably doing the right thing there.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is a lot of things is if you take any particular field, you can probably become a journeyman, to understand the basic craft if you work at it for 5 or 6 years. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be, the craft you're taking as writing. You can probably become a journeyman and write something that's fairly good. Doesn't mean it's going to be a bestseller or anything, but you can get there. Then you really have to work even harder to get something that how would you call it, doesn't have too much fluff in it, that actually meets the expectations of the reading public. And so that's always something. Now, of course, the other thing is, a writer, you start to become pretty critical of the books you read. You start to say, how did this ever get published? Especially some of the top name authors. I think they slap some things out, and because they're top name, some of the stuff they do just slips by or is accepted. But it's a lot of things you're told not to, but if you're famous enough, you can do those things and get away with it.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a case. I mean, I think now I read books and articles and watch movies and everything in a very critical way regarding the writing and things now. So, but so the Bloodline Artifacts is available where? Where can people get this wonderful book?
It's available from Amazon on either Kindle or in a hard copy, and either in Amazon.ca or Amazon.com, whichever you use.
Yeah, and is it doing quite well? Is there quite a lot of interest in it?
Well, it's done fairly well. I've sold a lot of copies, you know, let's say out of the trunk at various bookstores and so on. Get good feedback, but when you get somebody to read it, the best feedback I get are from people who are in computer sciences and so on, because it is a complex novel, and it's a mystery in it as well. So it's not only speculative, but there's a mystery. You're trying to figure out what really is going on here. So I've got a lot of good feedback, and I got a couple of, well, I don't really like it, but that's fine. You get that, of course.
Well, I think you're going to get. You can't please everyone, can you? Really, I suppose so. So anyway, so people at least know where to find it. I wish you all the best with that. I'm sure it's going to continue. Sure, I'll see you around in person on the writing circuit.
Right.
Thanks for being with us, and good luck with everything.
Well, thank you for the interview. I appreciate it.